Looks like we're live.
You ready?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first day of March. Sunny outside, beautiful weather, a little chilly, a little snow on the ground still, which I personally enjoy. So hope everyone was able to maneuver well with the snow and get things done. Irma, would you mind doing a quick roll call, please?
Yes. Jeff Miller.
Here.
Mark May. Mark May.
He's out sick.
Ashley Maury.
Here.
Jeremy McKay. Absent. John Hannum.
Here.
Jason Stacks. Samantha Ross. Mark Smith. Mark Smith.
He's on. He might be joining. His name's up.
Okay. Thomas
Yes, Tom's here.
Crozier.
Yes,
Okay.
here.
And Justin Wiedemann.
Here.
Here. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Irma. With that, has everyone had an opportunity to look over the agenda? And if so, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Oh, I'll approve. Oh, I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Moving forward. Approval of the February minutes. I'm sure everyone has gone in to look at that.
I would love to approve those, Jeff. Motion to approve February minutes.
Sean, thank you. Very, very kind of you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Both Tom and Mark are seconding and thirding. So with that, any further discussion? No other discussion. All in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand. Aye.
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 Motion carries. Moving on. We'll skip the public comment because I didn't see any. And then we're moving on to action item number 5. Tori, do you want to jump in here and work the magic?
Yep. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen.
I love a good screen sharing.
Presentation in the morning. Okay. Everyone see that okay? So for the record, Tori Banford with the City of Salem Urban Development Department. Starting out with the urban renewal area, just as a starter, established in 2001 is the boundary here. So what that means is with the property tax growth that occurs over time, funding is retained for specific projects in the urban renewal plan in this area. Today I'll be talking about what was the Toolbox program. I'll talk about that a little bit. Toolbox started pretty shortly after the establishment of the urban renewal area. Around 2014, program changed to the West Salem Urban Renewal Area Redevelopment Grant Program. And so since around 2016, these are the projects. So it started with the yellow projects, went to the orange, then it goes to purple and blue, were the most recent. So as you can see, the investments occurred throughout the district, a little less so on the east side, higher concentration around Patterson. So those who've frequented like Chicha and places like that, you've probably seen those surroundings change a little bit as a result of these investments. So this is just a highlight of some of the projects that were done as a result of the grant program. So at the left side, that's the point at Glen Creek. That used to be 7 lots. It was combined into 3 and redeveloped. It's probably the most expensive project to date. And then some other examples include industrial investments in manufacturing equipment and building expansion. So in this case, True Brothers, now Baxter's. Down in the right corner, staying with that industrial theme, is West Salem Machinery. They've been doing some investments in automation. So some of that, if you're familiar with the products they put together, really large recycling. It's a global organization. They ship and assemble worldwide. And so some of the parts that they produce built in West Salem at their West Salem location. And then we have office building, the right corner, and the bottom corner is the latest one, the Edward Jones building off of Patterson, and the clinic on the left corner, just as a range of services, office building, industrial building expansion, manufacturing equipment, commercial retail services. Like I said, the toolbox started shortly after the establishment of the urban renewal area. And what that was basically like a copy paste. There was a downtown program, and that's typically where you see it, is with the historic other cities that have a historic downtown. As soon as there's an urban renewal area, they're moving pretty quickly to establish downtown revitalization or a toolbox facade improvement program. And that's really a good fit when you have like a downtown core that's historic, where maybe there's aging brick facades that haven't had much love over time. So those smaller grants can go in and put on new paint or repair brick, maybe replace a window or something like that, something typically in public view. And that's basically what was copied over to West Salem. West Salem, there's only really one historic building, the old City Hall building that's off Edgewater. We did have a toolbox that went there to improve that area, that building. So over time, really was just putting in awnings, replacing windows. A lot of applicants would come back, every 2 to 4 years or so for new paint on the outside, and that became a recurring theme. And so around 2014, there was a discussion with this group, not this group particularly, but with WestRev, with the West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board, with the Urban Renewal Agency, internal staff, to see if it's, with the continuation of the existing toolbox, these, paint on buildings that were historic wasn't contributing to the increased tax value that was needed for urban renewal projects. So there was a shift in the focus. So rather than, not having the historic buildings that need improvement, there's more of a need in West Salem to redevelop, there's old building stock. There's been expressed interest in the market to, like we saw at the point at Glen Creek, to acquire multiple lots, combine them and build something different. And so this could happen obviously over time. What the grant does is it's a upfront incentive to make it happen sooner. So in this case, with the plan, with the changes with the redevelopment grant program, you have what's an eligible project. And so to frame this, we had to go to guidelines with legal and specify exactly what's meant, so there's not any complete confusion, because we'll get funding requests from a lot of different groups, but if it doesn't meet criteria for urban renewal, we're held to state statute too. So there are capital improvements and things, fixed improvements, that urban renewal can be used for, and there are a lot of things that can't be used for. So in this case, defining an eligible project. So what it was for the redevelopment grant was what's taxable. So in this case, increase in building square footage. So if you had a building addition, new building construction would add value. Manufacturing equipment that's permanent, that's taxable, that would be an eligible expense. So that's pretty much like the three criteria that determine an eligible project. There's also environmental cleanup. So we have had some where there's oil, lead, or asbestos. Where that is different is overall, urban renewal is intended to remove blight. So if something wasn't there to help offset asbestos or lead or oil in the soil, it could sit there blighted in disrepair for years. And so by providing a financial incentive to help address some of those costs, we can make sure that it doesn't sit there blighting the area and can be used for different purposes. So the way it is too is a 20% grant match. So it's 80% private funded. That's a $300,000 grant maximum. 2 years for them to complete the work. So once they come in, they do the application. We work with them to make sure everything is complete. We put together kind of a contract, a commitment letter that states that they have 2 years to, from the receipt of the grant commitment to, they have 2 years to do the work, and then they have to fulfill building permits, certificate of occupancy. They have to provide that evidence. We have a retainer fee, like a remaining grant disbursement that's held to ensure the project is complete. They have to retain the investment for 10 years. So that's just a means to recuperate the grant expense. And that can be replaced too. So in the case of, if we have manufacturers with a piece of equipment, if in 5 years they want to upgrade, if they have huge market demand, they need to do something else, it allows for them to reinvest. They're not going to get penalized for removing that piece of equipment as long as it's replaced with something of equal or greater value. And then there's the public benefit. So the public benefit obviously is engaging that property, ensuring it's utilized, that it's not sitting vacant and blighting the area, adding jobs, adding services, adding office space. So there's a lot of different public benefits there. I shared in the budget discussion as far as how many grants we do around, it was 3 for a while. We're finding it to be around 2 grants per year, given the nature of the projects are pretty substantial. So it takes some time to get all the permitting in place and get to a point where you can construct. So we get about 2 of these projects per year. The average grant amount's around 140,000, and to the private match of average 1.6 million. So it's a pretty good ratio. So that leads us to the conversation today. Like I said, the way it's framed, there's a maximum grant amount of 300,000, and that's been obviously fine with where most of the private match has been 1.6 million. But now we're entering into some projects that could be a little bit more complicated to get through, a little bit more costly. So there have been redevelopment. We have a similar redevelopment grant program in downtown and in North Gateway, where they've all experienced exceptions to the grant amount. We haven't experienced that yet, but I feel like that's probably coming. So I wanted to have this conversation with the group to see your thoughts on framing exception criteria around the maximum grant amount. So everything else that I just went over would stay the same. It's just having some guidance in what would be like an allowable pursuit of having an increased grant amount to offset some of these bigger costs that will likely be encountered as a result of redeveloping these other properties. So these are, one is Old Oregon Fruit that's now owned by a developer. The gate, the fencing areas that's where 2nd Street will go through. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that, as far as the context, that's Patterson and 2nd Street basically. So these are just some of those older food processing buildings that are now transitioning. And then the other one on the right side is the Rain Suite building, just off Wallace and 2nd Street as well. Any questions so far about the grant, what qualifies, projects that have been funded?
Quick question, actually. You were saying that the average is 1.6 million,
Yeah.
1.6 to get the 3. So it's really 1.2
Oh,
to get
no.
3.
Yeah, 1.2 to get the 3, but 1.6 is typically how much is spent. That's like the average. We've had some like the point at Glen Creek that was like a $10 to $13 million project with a 300,000 grant. So,
and then the 10-year retention, just for clarity, because that doesn't mean that developer, that owner has to retain that building for 10 years. Is that correct? That was more of an equipment issue.
no, building too, but it's typical. I mean, it's unlikely that they're going to build a building and then tear it down and build something else. I mean, in that case, if they are replacing that building with something else, as long as it's of greater value, but that's uncommon. Mostly, the retention aspect of it was we have a grant in Fairview, and other places where in North Gateway too, where those investments were made, and then they were looking at a different location in Salem. So then we just have to communicate. You usually know up front, but if management changes or something like that, and they see an opportunity for a different lease rate, a different part of town, then we just have to say, this is a renewal investment, has to stay for whatever period of time.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So for the discussion today, again, the grant itself is going to remain the same. Really looking at guidance on how to treat a request for an exception to 300,000 maximum. And so internally, we've been talking about it. We've seen, like I said, in North Gateway in 2017, there were 2 exceptions. In downtown, they anticipated needing a mechanism to, for the grant exception. So they went through and established criteria in 2017. So that's kind of where we are now. We haven't received an exception request yet. Really preparing for in the event that it does happen, so that we have some guidance of, what this group would recommend as an advisory board be considered. If this would go to the agency, so the agency would evaluate. It could be just based on what the request is by in this case a developer. They want more than 300,000. If there's not been this conversation, they don't really have anything to go off of. So I'm framing it right now for discussion, as they'll need these 2 things at least to have to go to the agency for consideration for an exception to the maximum 300,000. So 1, adaptive reuse, that would be defined as transitioning from industrial uses to multifamily housing or mixed use or commercial retail uses. So a significant change in the uses in the building, or increased density where the building will include more than 1 story. And then the second piece that would be required is the investment level would have to be greater than 3 million. Like I said, the average has been 1.6. We really only had 1 around that 10 to 13 mark. There was no request at the time for additional funds. They've done development elsewhere in the city. So I think they were just appreciative that that was available in general. But that's how I'm framing it. Then I'm opening it up to conversation. As for discussion today, so it can be remain as is without considering any criteria for exceptions. And then if it goes to the agency, it goes to them and they can determine whether or not to support an exception to 300,000 or not. The second option is, as I presented it here, if this works, if you feel like this is sufficient, if it's a good incentive, but also kind of results in hopefully some outcomes that we want to see in West Salem, great. The other option is, what do you think? You have something that you want to throw on there or consider? So really this is kind of that open discussion piece to get your thoughts on what I've laid out, and then see if you have anything else that you want to see in there. I'll stop sharing.
Can you hear me okay, you guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning. I had a question on the density and the more than one story, the thought process behind that. And then just to clarify, the investment from 1.2 to 3 million, is that due to the cost of materials, labor, so on and so forth?
So on the density, it's in a mixed use zone. So, and that's just something, it wouldn't be required necessarily. So on that adaptive reuse, you have two options. So on one option, it's just transitioning significant shift in use from industrial to commercial, retail, mixed use, whatever. The density side is just like an incentive. As we get more developed in West Salem, it'll happen. Things will get more dense. So you'll see, 2-3 story potentially. So that's just an incentive to see that happen sooner. If you don't like that idea, it's not a requirement the way that I have it framed now. It could be, if they're doing an increased density where they have more than one story, it could be like a live work. So they could have, I've heard discussions about that where, some of this area is existing industrial, but it has the new mixed use. So they could do a balance of, they could do like a smaller trade down below and then have something up above where they have a dwelling. So that's just something else where they could meet that reuse criteria.
So,
And then it's the pricing. So the 3 million, not really cost of materials. I think the 300,000 has been adequate to date. It's really just another, like a higher incentive, if they meet these adaptive reuse piece, and they're willing to invest 3 million or more, then they could be eligible for more than 300,000 in the grant fund.
Tori, I have a question. So, I mean, the 3 million is basically, so there's a incentive for like larger projects to develop a big area, which I would imagine that particular location, there are tear down costs. So I think it seems like it's geared more to creating something that can happen in that particular area off 2nd Street. Is that the reason for structuring it the way that you've structured it or proposed?
I could see things happening probably sooner 2nd Street. There's a lot more activity. I think owners of the buildings, the property there, are wary of having a new street come through and it looks the way that it is. So we're definitely seeing a lot more activity there, but this could be to the north too, where you have, underutilized industrial buildings. Yes, 2nd Street could happen sooner where this would be applicable to them, but it could go in, at other projects too. On the east side, on the map, there was auto body repair shop, that a whole new building that was built on that side. So some of those older, I think there's like an old insurance building and things, if those change to something different, maybe a land assembly and they combine multiple lots, they have to take down what's there and build something different. This would just help give it an incentive to do kind of a bigger project than the standard, I guess. Okay.
And then the matching amount, would it be an up to 20% or would it be 20% typically, or?
It's always 20% is the match. So that would stay the same. So in this case, if they're spending 3 million, 10 million, whatever, it'd be 20% up to a maximum. So what we've seen in downtown, and I think even North Gateway, it's been up as much as 700,000. So it could be almost more than double what the maximum is now, potentially, depending on what. And it's still that 20%. So they'd have to make, whoever's better at math on the fly, they'd have to make a significant investment to get a 20% match of 700,000, for example. So
okay,
that 1.4 through 3 million. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tori, is there any examples in the other urban renewal areas of what that criteria is that we would be able to lean on?
Yeah,
And
I have.
the second question. I'm sorry, second question was,
Yeah.
you had mentioned up to 700 grand, and is that because then after 700 grand, there's more criteria of using union shops and things of that nature? Is that prevailing
Right.
wage, in
It
other words?
becomes, yeah, prevailing wage. Yeah, it gets more expensive. It basically becomes a public works project, and public works projects are um, labor laws. Yeah, so the cost to construct, they lose some control, and they'd have to, the developer, they just have to be aware that, if it goes above, I don't want to say it's 799,000. I was keeping it at 750,000 just to be like as a buffer. But right, it would trigger those things as basically a public investment, so it would require construction and everything else to be union labor law standards. As far as criteria, in 2017, the downtown went through their process. Happy to share the link so you can see the report. What they included were, they had a minimum capital improvement criteria in not item 1. So it has to be either new construction, mixed use with housing, alley improvements, historic preservation, expansion of existing business, upper floor renovations. I know that at the time, upper floors were critical. They were trying to get more housing and office downtown, and these historic buildings with ADA, the upper floors weren't being engaged because it was expensive to get elevators and things in those buildings. So that's where this would be a little bit different than what we're looking at for West Salem. As far as leverage, they have a 4-to-1 private public funds. That was a requirement. And then they have on the third one, so the payback analysis within 7 to 10 years has to be characterized as blight due to obsolescence, deterioration, dilapidation. And then the affordable housing was a critical piece for downtown too. So that's how their criteria were framed for downtown.
Copy.
So we have 2 in this case, they had 3.
And so you're looking for a discussion on raising that threshold and maybe additional criteria. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so I guess you have 3 options. One, like I said, you can just keep talking about it and keep it as is. And then, if something comes up, if we don't have the criteria framed or recommended to the agency, that would just go directly to the agency and they can decide, if they want to give more money or not. Option 2 is how I framed it. If that works for you, then you guys could make a recommendation that the agency consider what we discussed. Or the third option is, if there's something from downtown you liked, or if you, with your background, see that maybe it doesn't address something in particular that you want to see addressed, that would give you the flexibility to add, maybe a third criteria or fourth or whatever, if you wanted to see that.
Troy, can you talk a little bit about when you talk about West Salem Machine, they're getting more automated products. How does that equate to blight? In other words, from my perspective, just to be really transparent with the group, when I think of West Salem Machine they're doing some really cool things, which I'd like to tour. Actually, I think it'd be fun to go tour that, since they've been
talking to Joel about that. Yeah,
given some dollars. It'd be cool for this group to tour it similarly like we did with the therapy, the physical therapist group. But that aside, when I think of what this group is trying to accomplish, or this urban renewal area is like the developer that bought Oregon Fruit there on what was it?
Yeah, 2nd Street. Yeah,
between 2nd and Edgewater.
Yeah.
In my mind, seeing that go away and seeing it be something different is a priority. It would be more of a priority, in my opinion. I think the group should all chime in on what their thoughts are on something like that, as opposed to a machine that's going in a building that no one's going to see the difference. And I don't know how that, I know it changes the tax basis, in other words, but just my kind of two thoughts. It'll be neat. And I do believe the developer that owns that property there on Edgewater and Second is going to be doing something probably relatively cool. He's really active elsewhere right now in Kaiser and other things. So seeing that transform into something different is, I think, a kind of a priority from my perspective, but I'd like to open it up and see what everyone else's thoughts are and hear for some people.
Yeah. If I can address some of what you said. So
yeah,
that's why this criteria I think is important. I think that's great how you framed it. That's really what's intended here, is to see that type of building change to something else. Would be the way that it's framed now. And I think that's why the exception criteria is important, because you could have potentially someone saying, I'm going to make a big equipment investment, which is great. But to your point, I don't know that it meets that part of the blight. So when you look at the way blight's defined in statute, we're in urban growth boundaries. So any land that's underutilized in an urban growth boundary is economic development challenged. So it's like a level of blight. It's not like what your typical is, like Mark's not here, but the Rain Suites building that hasn't had investment for years is clearly blight. That's your typical visual blight. This is just different in that, addresses jobs in the community. And I know that that's important to everybody, but I think that's the point too, is that if we can get criteria set up, we can focus, if there is a request that for additional funds, there's at least this recommendation, or hopefully the agency would adopt it as well. So when they come in, they look at it and they say, this is intended to change the makeup of what Salem looks like, what Salem looks like now. So.
Right, and that
Yeah,
seems
perhaps,
to be, go ahead, Mark.
nope, sorry,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Justin.
I was going to say that it seems to be that that change is embedded in that first point, in that there has to be a change in the use in order to get the extra funds. Would I be correct in saying that, Story?
Right. Yeah. So in that adaptive reuse piece, they have two ways to meet that requirement. So on one hand, a significant shift. So like in this case, where you have old industrial and you're wanting to do something different to it, that's the first point. The other one would be increased density. So if they wanted to, do live work where they have living up above, it's really trying to address, we have a housing supply issue. So, and a lot of this investment's happening downtown. It'd be nice to get, people, higher density, people living different housing products, potentially in West Salem, where they could be closer to work and live there too. So yeah, exactly. So that would be the way that it's framed right now.
Just for clarity for the group, a change of use or an application of change of use or change of occupancy through the city doesn't necessarily mean that it's a vastly different use. In most cases, it's, you can go apply for a change of occupancy that goes from office to office. It doesn't necessarily change anything. It's just a mechanism, I believe, for the city to get a little taste and to know what's going on in the community as far as businesses. So I think, Justin, to your point, a change of use would need to be it's going from a vacant industrial building to a mixed use, or retail on the bottom, living upstairs, a definitive change, as opposed to it's going from an empty building. The change of use is going to be storage units in an empty building. That to me is just making the clarification between those two things is a little different. So
yeah, I'll say too that the existing criteria still remain. So it's 20%. So they still have to invest heavily if they want to get just the maximum of 300,000. They, the way that it's structured, they have to make some pretty significant investments. So that will remain. This will just be more of an investment. So by nature of that match, they will just be eligible to a greater grant potentially.
Any other further comments or discussion for Tori?
I wanted to share on the process. Let me put my thing back up here. Sure. All right. So just again, this is how I framed it for the criteria. As far as the recommendation, I noted it in the agenda. So if you wanted to verbally reference that, or you could say as presented, just saying, you know, if that's the direction the group wants to go, I'm trying to make it simple. As far as process, so this is the first group. We discussed it internally to get that initial framework. Wanted to get your thoughts to see if you had any additional pieces to add. The next thing would be for legal to review it to make sure that it meets statute and city codes and everything. And then it'll go to the urban renewal agency, which is city council. Typically they gavel in first as the housing authority, then second as urban renewal agency, and then council. So it would be at their agency meeting where they would take, you know, what we make as staff as a recommendation and what you guys suggest. So that's the process. Legal review and agency consideration could be, you know, that could be probably 2 months, 2 to 3 months, probably be this summer, you know, if it were to go through.
Another question from my perspective is budget. I don't have the budget in front of me, so I don't remember exactly what we have allocated, but my thought is if someone spends $3 million to stick with the same ratio, 1.2 to get 3, it'd be 3 million to get 750 grand to stay under the that threshold we talked about earlier. So if we were to continue to get approximately 2 of those in a year, potentially 3, I mean, if people start seeing that those dollars raise the budget, how does that affect our budget? And do we have a mechanism for changing along the way to say, hey, we're going to bring in more money or we're going to do something else?
Sure. Yeah. So when we framed it initially, my memo to you guys, I was anticipating, because at that point we're already internally talking about exception criteria. So I suggested in the budget piece that we allocate additional funds for the grant, anticipating that you could have, I still anticipate maybe 2 in the year, you know, but in this case, you know, if we do see one of these bigger properties develop, that could take, let's say 700,000 in one case. And we typically like to have around 900,000. We conservatively budget for 3 big projects, even though we've been at around the 140,000 mark. Because we have had some, usually the nice thing about that is, you know, if you go back to that map where I had all the different projects that have happened over time, 2016 is where we started to see it, because it took from the changes in 2014 for it to get out in the community and then for them to actually start to do projects. So what that involves is, like, you know, as you Jeff, you know, identifying site, acquiring it, going through the process to do, you know, architectural plans, engineering plans. So it took a couple of years before we started to see those dot on the map. And that's still the case now. Usually at this point, the brokerage community is familiar with it. Development community is familiar with it. Businesses know about it. So they'll engage us pretty early to say, you know, is this eligible? What about this? You know, I anticipate doing my project, you know, being ready to go in 6 months. Will we have funding? So that conversation is happening a lot. So that conversation is happening now. I could see where we could have 2 to 3 projects in this year, and we tried to account for that in our budget process. Worst case scenario, if we happen to get, let's say that's 3 big projects that meet the exception criteria, we have additional funding that we could tap into that would have to go through you guys as you know, a budget shift to move funds from unspecified to the grant. So it'd give you an opportunity to say, like, you know, I think we're good on this exception. Let's just grant them 300,000 if we have it available, or, you know, let's open it up to more if it's a significant investment in a big project. So that would still come to you if it's a, you know, additional budget or a budget shift from unspecified to the grant program. It'll come back to you.
So if I'm hearing that correctly, Tori, you're saying that again, not having the budget in front of me, I apologize. I should have thought this through ahead of time and had that budget ready, but you're saying there's around 900 annually is what we have ready to go. If one of these projects comes through, which there will be, I mean, there's at least 3 buildings I can think of right out of the gate that might be jumping in on this year. It would basically wipe that portion out, and 2 of them, in theory, I mean, hypothetically speaking,
Right,
would have to come back to the group, and we'd have to say, okay, yeah, we need to come up with another basically 1.5 million on spread across 2 projects at 750 grand. Is that correct?
so the way that we set it up, it was 900,000 every budget year, and so this time we anticipated more. So it's a little gray because we're anticipating what could get done. You know, we could have an application come in tomorrow, and that could, you know, like I said earlier, we usually see these constructed in a year to 2 years. So that, you know, we have to make sure that we have the budget for that. But that said, we anticipated, like you did, where we could have these bigger projects, and we're now, you know, if this is supported, having this exception criteria, I think we could be at around 1.2 million in July. So we'd have, you know, roughly 300,000 more than we've had in the previous budgeted years. So in that case, you could have, you know, almost 2, you know, if they were to get to that 700,000, 600,000 mark, you know, you could have 2 at 600,000 and 1, you know, basically 2 at 600,000. Again, I think it would be pretty significant. I've seen some pre-apps for these buildings. I don't think it's gone to a level of design where all of them will go at the same time. I think it'll be over time. So
Yeah, copy. And just if you're not in construction or in the commercial real estate world, the cost, going back to Samantha's comments earlier, to redevelop a building, even to repurpose a building with minimal TI is terribly expensive right now. Labor and some other things, lumber's come down considerably, but they're still really expensive by comparison.
I just want to say too, I should have mentioned this before for the Samantha's of the world, the commercial brokers, lenders, we're partners typically with them. Yeah, usually we use the same application materials. So, you know, I usually get a copy of either the market comparisons or the appraisal. We usually have the financing in place. Like everything's basically ready to go by the time they come to us. We're just there for additional gap funding and also as an incentive to have the project happen sooner. So it's not in lieu of, or, you know, it's not in competition with them, very much a partnership. You know, hopefully they're getting business sooner as a result of, you know, the grant investment in that type of work. So
does anyone have any further comments or any suggestion for criteria? Kind of going back to earlier comments of, instead of it being a machine type issue, an internal machinery, but more of a blighted property, repurposing of a property. Is that a criteria that this group is interested in, not interested in? It'd be good to kind of hear from people.
Yeah, Jeff, great point. Definitely, because it's all about, I don't want to say curb appeal, but it just makes more sense when it's on the outside and folks can see it, you know, versus a machine inside that no one's going to see. So I would have to agree with you on that.
Are there any design criteria for, I mean, if you're repurposing a building to, I guess you could say, impact the appearance, or I mean, like minimum guidelines or anything like that?
I think that's a good point. I would say with new construction, yes. So in the case, our Salem already changed the zone there. So if they were to build like a new building for like a mixed use building, there are requirements within that zone that they have to meet as far as design standards. With, you know, an existing building, I think that could be a good one, you know, where we have, you know, I don't know how to frame it, but something that addresses the visual aesthetic, curb appeal, something I'll think about just a general term because it's hard to say specifically because you don't want to have like, you meet 2 criteria, then the third one, doesn't quite meet the kind of subjective look. So then you don't get that additional funding. So I'll have to think of a way, but I think I understand from the group if that's how you all feel. I think that's an important piece that isn't really captured in what I suggested is, that visual curb appeal. And I'll have to think of ways to frame that that makes sense and could be applicable. But I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I just want to go back. I want to be really clear. I'm a huge fan of West Salem Machine and manufacturing in general. I'm not trying to advocate against that at all. I think I was just more going along the lines if there's going to be an exception and someone's going to be we're going to be putting in 750 grand as an example. It'd be nice to see an exterior, a visual difference to the community as well.
Thanks for the clarification. I was wondering. Just kidding.
Maybe that's a good point. Visual difference.
Yeah.
Maybe, and I could look internally. We could talk about it, how to frame that criteria as a visual difference. But I think that's a good way to do it. Put it. Sorry, Samantha.
No, I was just going to mention that we're actually going over later this morning, and we're going to be doing a tour of the facility. So interesting that this is coming up. Coincidence.
You're going to what, Salem Machinery or what facility? Oh yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, I'll have to talk to Joel and see if we can arrange something.
Yeah, I'll mention it to him when I'm over there. That'd be great.
Okay, great. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a WSBA thing, Samantha, or the bank?
Mm-hmm. It's a bank thing.
Okay.
Connection through WSBA, so it's all kind of intertwined.
Copy.
I would also add that project did have visual change, but I wouldn't say it made it appealing.
It did.
John, anything that you'd like to add? Ashley?
Other than the call out on the equipment piece, which I think is important, I'm trying to kind of think through any other reasons why we wouldn't want to look at something like this. Because in my mind, our whole purpose is to help enhance that West Salem urban renewal area, and that's what this should do. But the equipment piece, the visual piece, I'm just trying to kind of see if there's other things we should be considering why we wouldn't want to pursue something like this.
Thank you. Ashley, anything you'd like to add?
No, sounds good to me.
Thank you. Well, it seems like we've heard from everybody. So Tori, do you need us to make a motion? Just trying to think through the process here, because it seems like there was some discussion about adding a visual enhancement or some sort of verbiage.
Yeah, I can bring that back next month if you want. So what I can do is circulate some terms around. So with North Gateway and downtown already having it, I think it's a good, important piece to have included as, a visual improvement, whatever that means. Framing that a little bit, making sure that it's clear so it can be interpreted correctly from the development community and internally. So if it works for you guys, we can clear up that language a little bit more. And so in this case, it would be like the third criteria that would be considered. And so instead of today, one, you could make a recommendation and add that as the criteria, and then we could further define it before it goes to the agency, or I can come back to you with that third component, and then we could have this conversation again in April and take action then. Whatever you guys want to do.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to push a month just to see that language, if everyone is in somewhat of agreement of that, just to kind of enhance that language a little bit. And just one last thing I'll say is we're in the business in this group to give out money for these things to be done. I'd rather our budget get blown out of the water. We have to readjust because people are coming to us saying, hey, we're going to file for this exception so we can get the 750 grand, because that means big changes are happening and I'm all for it. So anyway,
Okay.
yeah, we'll push. Thank you, Tori.
All right. Sounds good.
So Tori, you want to just go right into update?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Project
Yep.
updates.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'm going to share. Turn off the labels. I hate the labels on Google Maps. Okay. All right. So really quickly. So 2nd Street, which is the project that's been in design over the last year. So it'll go from Girth, it'll go all the way through to Wallace. We're done with design, hoping to go out to bid next week, actually. So that'll be exciting. So it goes back to with this redevelopment grant discussion. You know, you guys are influential in making these changes. Sometimes they feel like it takes a long time to actually see that change. But hopefully as you go around West Salem, you can see it for yourselves. And especially once construction starts for 2nd Street, I think it'll be definitely a notable change through there. So that's happening. We just had the starting process to vacate 1st Street. So if you remember, we had this conversation, I think towards the end of last calendar year, to vacate 1st Street. So the 1st Street is this little, like if you go down here, no one really ever uses this. It's really not in very good condition. It's just real asphalt down, and it's a lot of upheaval and a lot of slope. I don't even know if 2 cars could pass by each other as they go around that kind of U through there. 1st Street used to go through where Goodwill is, and so I don't know, 2/3 of it at least was vacated as a result of that project. And so there's redevelopment potential here that we're making the argument. We've heard too from owners and developers that without either creating an alley or vacating that street, they'd have to build it to city standards. So basically, like 2nd Street is a local street. It'd have to be local street standard through there. And it just doesn't make sense. And so it's sat vacant, you know, as a parking lot. And there is a business that's off Edgewater. They'll access that 1st Street piece to get, you can see the cars there to the north. So they'll have like the owners, managers, employees could park back there. But the majority of traffic is off Edgewater. So that was one of the things that, you know, we're getting that vacated so that it's not that burden to develop. Because they'd have to, like I said, pay to improve their share of the street through there. So by vacating it, that it removes that obstacle. So that had its there's a 4-step process to do that. It started on Monday. We'll have our public hearing, I think, in May, and then there'll be the final reading in June. So later this summer, we'll know if City Council is supportive of fully vacating that street. So just those 2 things are happening over there. Just wanted to give you an update on that. The West Salem Machinery Grant is done. So all that building, they did build out on their building, improved some of the facade, put a new sign out front, put in new equipment. All that work is done. There is an asbestos cleanup grant for this property here. That's I think on their final disbursement. So by, I don't know, probably in the next couple of months, both those grant obligations will be complete. And so we'll be ready as we get into the next year with the roughly 1.2 million ready to hopefully do some good other projects through here. So,
hey, Tori, just clarification, the asbestos cleanup, was it, what was that on?
So that was an old Oregon Fruit building.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so they're looking to do, they're gutting a lot of the inside and they want to reuse it. And so in that process, they encountered asbestos tiles that had to be removed. So it's been, I want to say, it was around $100,000, I think, in the grant amount for the asbestos removal. that's all I have. Anyone have questions or?
No. All right, well, thank you, Tori. Let's see where we are. So Tori, is that pretty much it from your perspective on the grant program, updated projects? We're moving kind of towards the end of the agenda here.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Samantha, you want to give us an update or any insights on what's going on with WSBA? You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. A little foggy this morning. We had to cancel our last meeting. Nikki Varney was our guest speaker, so we'll be rescheduling her. She represents Ward 8. For our next meeting in March, and again, it's the fourth Thursday of each month, we've got guest speakers, District Attorney Aaron Felton, and then Sheriff Mark Garton. So they'll be speaking with Commissioner Lyle Mordhorst. So that's all I have. And then membership, again, we're just continuing on increasing. We're getting ready for our annual golf tournament for 2023. So that should be a lot of fun. They've consistently grown through the years. So yeah, good stuff.
Thank you. Anyone from the neighborhood association? Tori, I know you're going to those quite a bit.
I have been going. I'm going in tonight. That they're easier to keep track of now that they're on Wednesday nights. First Wednesday of the month I have West Rab, and then I finish out the night in West Salem. So yeah, I've been going to those. I don't know. I guess I could just share that they meet at Ross now in person. They start at 6 p.m. So it's the second floor of Ross. As you go up the stairs where the back parking is, they're right in that, typically in that conference room there. I don't know what their agenda is today. Sorry, I should have brought that up. I didn't see anything. I know last month they had legislative reps from like talking budget, and there's the talk of the bridge district, creating a new district to help fund crossing with the Willamette, where the ferry crossing is to the north. I think there's discussions, and I think some opposition from Polk County about that location. That was a lot of the conversation last month.
Got it. Anybody else have anything?
The Wheatland Ferry. I couldn't
What's
remember the
that?
name. The Wheatland Ferry location. That's what was being discussed as a possible, full bridge connection. I couldn't remember the ferry location name. Sorry.
Thank you. Anybody else with anything that they'd like to add? Nothing being said. I will just add, for those of you who are chamber members, tomorrow is our public policy meeting, starts at 7 a.m. at the chamber offices. Similarly to WSBA, what Samantha had mentioned, Commissioner Mordhorst and Sheriff Garton will be there talking about a new bond for police, sheriff's office, I believe, that being proposed, and they will be presenting to the group tomorrow. It's a 3-topic meeting tomorrow morning. That'll be the first one. Second one is the new interstate bridge replacement project. There's some ODOT people that are going to be there providing some insight on that bridge. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to any of the tolling conversations that have been out there in the ether. There'll be some discussion of the tolling and what that looks like as well, is my understanding. And then the third thing is the chamber has hired a lobbyist to be down at the Capitol during this legislative session. And moving forward throughout the remainder of the session, there will always be about 20 minutes of every public policy meeting dedicated to updates from that lobbyist, who will be there providing insights onto bills and things of that nature. So if that is of interest to anybody and you are a member, it'd be great to see you. You can also see it via online through Zoom, I suppose.
Hey, Jeff, location,
Yep.
is that the chamber building there?
Yep, chamber offices right there on, what is that, Liberty or Commercial? I don't even remember.
And it's at 7 a.m.?
7 a.m. to 8:30 tomorrow morning. And then if anyone's interested, I can also provide a Zoom link if, someone wants to just log in as a member and listen.
That'd be great.
Perfect. Anything on Edgewater? Anybody know anything about what's going on in Edgewater? I don't know. Okay. Well, kind of the last thing, we always have meeting topics, and Tori, I know that you had a calendar of kind of what we were doing, big topic things throughout the remainder of the year. But if there's anything that anyone wants to add, we can either discuss it here, or you can shoot Tori an email, myself, Mark, whoever, and we can get something on the docket for that discussion as well.
Yeah, so just to let you know, I've reached out to the city manager's office to see if someone can come speak to the budget process, bond status, projects that'll go first, and then also have a public works update. I think it might be Aaron Edelman. He was our engineer for 2nd Street before it shifted to Aaron Kinsey. Both great, but it'll give you a chance to see Aaron Edelman again. But he'd probably get into more detail on what specific projects will be happening or they're gearing up to do this next construction season. They'll probably give an update too on Marine Drive to the north as part of the bond project. So he might speak to timing on that. And then also, as far as agenda topics, I'll bring back the exception criteria with that visual piece. So hopefully it'll be framed in a way that'll be understandable to everybody. So those will be the three main things at the next meeting.
Tori, it'd be great also if you have someone from the manager's office, maybe talking about, I know right now there's a lot of topic with downtown parking, which doesn't necessarily affect our area. However, it is a citywide issue. And then additionally, there was a budget meeting that I went to through the city last week, I think one night, that talked about kind of budget shortfalls that the city's going to be experiencing. And so there's discussion of raising fees to utilities and things of that nature. There's several different options. It'd be neat maybe to hear something about that too, as that gets closer, or something along those lines.
Yeah, so Courtney is with the city manager's office, and she handles a lot of the council goals, priorities, and communications. She used to actually be in urban development and did what I do. So she always enjoys coming back, and I think she's been at these meetings over the last couple of years. So she could speak probably to the budget and fees. I think on the parking side, so I was at council meeting for other reasons on Monday, where the mayor made a motion to revisit the paid parking downtown. So I think that's a good point. I think April might be soon. If it's okay with you guys, I might have Sarah probably be from our office. She's handled parking in the past, and I think it'll be her project now that it's a priority going forward. She could probably give more details about that in May, if that's possible, if that works for you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, unless there's anything else for the good of the order, not seeing any. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Pleasure to see everyone this morning, and hope you have a great day and the rest of your week.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.